She told me I couldn't bring birthday cake to my own granddaughter's party unless I submitted the ingredient list 72 hours in advance. I was standing on the front porch of their townhouse in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, holding a box from Ellie's favorite bakery on 4th Street, the one with the pink awning and the little cat painted on the window, and my son-in-law Derek was blocking the doorway with his arms crossed, reading from his phone like he was citing a building code. No outside food. No gifts over $25 without prior written approval. No staying past the designated visit window. I looked past him into the hallway, where I could see the edge of a paper banner that read, "Happy 5th Birthday, Ellie," in purple glitter glue. And I could hear her laughing somewhere in the kitchen, that bright, breathless laugh she has that sounds exactly like her mother did at that age. Derek said he was sorry, but rules are rules. And I stood there holding a $9 cake from a bakery my granddaughter loves. And I smiled, because what else do you do when the man your daughter married tells you that your love needs paperwork? My name is Frank Connolly. I'm 58 years old. I spent 26 years as a firefighter with the city of Allentown, Engine Company 12, and I retired 3 years ago after a knee surgery that didn't go the way anyone hoped. My wife Marie passed 2 years ago this April, cardiac arrhythmia. She went to bed on a Tuesday night complaining about feeling dizzy, and she didn't wake up on Wednesday morning. There was no long goodbye, no hospital vigil, no time to say the things you always think you'll have time to say. One day she was standing at the stove making her pasta e fagioli and telling me I needed to clean out the garage. And the next day she was gone, and the garage is still a mess because every time I go in there I see her garden gloves on the shelf and I walk back inside. Marie was the kind of woman who could talk to anyone. Cashiers, neighbors, strangers in the waiting room at the dentist. She remembered names. She remembered details. She'd ask the woman at the post office how her daughter's volleyball season was going, and she meant it. She loved our daughter Katie with a fierceness that sometimes startled me, the way she'd go quiet and watchful whenever Katie was struggling, like a person keeping vigil over something precious. When Ellie was born, Marie held her in the hospital room and didn't say a word for almost 10 minutes. She just looked at her. When I asked if she was okay, she said, "Frank, I didn't know I had this much room left." She meant room in her heart. She was like that. She could say things that would stop you cold. After Marie died, I thought the worst part would be the empty side of the bed, the coffee mug still in the cabinet that I couldn't bring myself to move. The voicemail I kept on my phone just to hear her say, "It's me. Pick up. I need you to get half and half on the way home." But the worst part wasn't the absence. The worst part was what filled the space she left. Because Marie had been the bridge between me and Katie's household, and once she was gone, I realized how much of that bridge had been her. Katie married Derek Scanlon when she was 28. He was 31 at the time, worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove a leased Audi, and had the kind of confidence that in small doses seems charming, and in large doses starts to feel like a weather system you can't get out of. Marie had always been careful around Derek. She never said anything directly, but I noticed the way she'd go quiet when he talked over Katie at dinner, the way she'd change the subject when he made those little comments about Katie's spending or Katie's cooking or Katie's decision to stop working after Ellie was born. Marie would catch my eye across the table sometimes and give me the smallest shake of her head, which meant, "Not now, Frank. Let it go." I let it go. I let a lot of things go. I'm not a man who looks for conflict. I spent my career running into buildings that were on fire, and when I got home, I wanted peace. I wanted quiet dinners and football on Sundays, and the sound of my granddaughter playing in the backyard. I didn't want to be the father-in-law who made trouble. So when Derek started setting rules after Marie passed, I followed them. It began small. Derek said it would be better if I called before coming over instead of just stopping by. That seemed reasonable. Marie and I had always had an open-door thing with Katie. But times change, and I understood that Derek liked structure, so I called ahead. Then the calls started getting screened. I'd leave a message, and Katie would text back hours later saying it wasn't a great time. Then Derek suggested I limit visits to every other weekend, because Ellie's schedule was very full and they needed family time. I said okay. Then every other weekend became once a month. Then there was a spreadsheet. I'm not exaggerating. It was an actual spreadsheet, emailed to me by Derek from his work account with his signature block at the bottom like it was a sales proposal. It listed approved visit dates, time windows, a column for activity type indoor supervised or outdoor supervised, and a notes section where he had written things like no sugar and no screen time and do not discuss family finances. At the bottom, there was a line that said, "Visits are subject to adjustment based on household needs." I printed it out. I sat at the kitchen table with it in front of me, and I read it 3 times. I thought about Marie, how she would have handled this. She would have called Katie directly. She would have said something warm and immovable, the way she always did, something that sounded gentle but left no room for argument. I didn't have that ability. I've never been good with words. I'm good with ladders and hose lines and structural assessments. I'm good at knowing when a floor is about to give. But talking to my daughter about her husband, without making things worse, that I didn't know how to do. So I followed the spreadsheet. I showed up on the approved dates, during the approved windows, with approved snacks in a paper bag. I sat on their gray couch and watched Ellie draw pictures of horses, which was her obsession that month. And I told her about the horses I'd seen as a kid on my uncle's property in Sullivan County, and she listened with her whole body the way children do, leaning forward, eyes wide, like I was telling her about another planet. Those 2-hour windows were everything to me. I'd drive 45 minutes each way from Allentown to Bethlehem and sit on that gray couch and hold on to every minute like a man gripping a rope. About 4 months after Marie died, I'd given Katie and Derek $75,000. It was money Marie and I had saved over the years, tucked away in a savings account she used to call the Someday Fund. They needed to renovate the townhouse. The kitchen was in bad shape, there was a leak in the basement, and Derek had mentioned at a dinner a few months earlier that they were stretched thin. I didn't think twice about it. I wrote the check and gave it to Katie at a Sunday visit. She cried. Derek shook my hand and said they'd put it to good use. I didn't ask for documentation. I didn't ask for a promissory note. It was family money, and they were family. What I didn't know was that the kitchen renovation cost about $22,000. The basement repair was another $8,000. That left $45,000 that I assumed was being held or used for household expenses, because that's what reasonable people do with a gift that large. I didn't ask, because I didn't think I needed to. 7 months after the money changed hands, the rules got worse. Derek emailed me a revised version of the spreadsheet. Visits were now once a month, Saturday afternoons only, 90 minutes maximum. There was a new rule. No phone calls to Katie without going through Derek first. And then, at the bottom of the email, a paragraph that made me set my coffee down and read it 4 times. He wrote that after careful consideration, he and Katie felt it was appropriate for me to make a monthly financial contribution toward Ellie's care and education as a condition of continued regular access. He called it a family partnership arrangement. The amount was $600 a month, wired to an account in Derek's name. He wrote that this reflected the reality that meaningful involvement in a child's life carries shared financial responsibility. I sat with that email for a long time. I read the last paragraph again. $600 a month, wired to an account in Derek's name, as a condition of seeing my granddaughter. I called Katie that evening. Derek answered. He said Katie was putting Ellie to bed and couldn't talk. I asked him to have her call me. She didn't call. The next morning, I texted her directly. She responded 6 hours later. Dad, Derek, and I are on the same page about this. It's what's best for Ellie. Please don't make it harder. I stared at that text for a very long time. I stared at the word, please. I thought about my daughter's face and tried to read between the lines of 14 words on a phone screen, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, something quieter and colder. The feeling you get when you're standing in a building and you hear the structure groan, and you know, with the certainty of someone who has heard that sound 100 times, that something is about to give. I didn't respond to the text. I paid the $600 that month, and the next. I did it because I was afraid that if I didn't, the door would close entirely, and I would lose the 90 minutes I had left with Ellie. She was 5 years old. She drew horses. She called me Papa Frank, because when she was 2, she couldn't say Grandpa, and the name stuck. She once told me that I smelled like outside, which Marie would have found hilarious, and which I think about almost every day. But I also did something else. I called a woman named Janet Torres. Janet was the wife of a man I'd worked with at Engine 12 for 19 years, a guy named Ruben Torres who had retired a year before me. Ruben and Janet had gone through a brutal situation with their son-in-law a few years back. Custody issues, financial manipulation, The whole thing. Janet had mentioned, during one of those long conversations you have at retirement parties, that they'd found a family law attorney in Easton who had changed their lives. She'd given me the name on a napkin, the way people do at those kinds of events, and I'd put it in my wallet and forgotten about it. I found the napkin in the back of my wallet behind an expired pharmacy card. The name on it was Lorraine Whitfield. I called her the next morning. Lorraine was not what I expected. She was maybe 45, spoke quietly, and had the manner of someone who listens more than she talks, which in my experience means she's the smartest person in the room. I told her everything. The rules, the spreadsheet, the $75,000, the $600 a month. The fact that I couldn't get Katie on the phone anymore without going through Derek. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Connolly, I want you to do 3 things. First, save every email, every text, every version of that spreadsheet. Second, pull together whatever documentation you have on the 75,000 bank records, canceled checks, anything. Third, think carefully about whether your daughter is making these decisions freely or whether she's relaying someone else's decisions as her own." That third thing stayed with me. I already knew the answer, but hearing it from someone else made it real in a way I hadn't let it be. I called my bank the next day and requested full records of the transfer. The $75,000 had been deposited into Katie and Derek's joint checking account in a single transfer. From there, I could only see my side of the transaction, but Lorraine explained that in the course of a legal proceeding, financial disclosure could be compelled, which meant that if we moved forward, we could find out exactly where the money went. Over the next 5 weeks, Lorraine built a case. She was meticulous. She documented every restricted visit, every canceled call, every version of the spreadsheet, the emails about the monthly payment, my records of the 2 payments I'd already made. She consulted with a forensic accountant named Dennis Kaplan, who reviewed the transfer records from my end and flagged several things I hadn't noticed. The original $75,000 had cleared their joint account within 3 months. The renovation invoices Lorraine had subpoenaed from the contractor totaled just under $31,000. That meant roughly $44,000 had moved somewhere I couldn't see, in a period far shorter than any renovation timeline would explain. Lorraine told me what she suspected. She'd seen it before, she said. Money given to a couple ends up in a single person's control. Separate accounts, investment apps, sometimes cash. The pattern was almost always the same. The person receiving the gift gives the money away freely, and someone else redirects it quietly. During those 5 weeks, I kept showing up. I kept following the spreadsheet. I sat on the gray couch and watched Ellie build a barn out of popsicle sticks for the plastic horse she'd named Butterscotch. I helped her glue the roof on. It fell off 3 times, and she laughed every time it happened, and so did I. And she said, "Papa Frank, we're bad at this." And I said, "We're terrible." And she threw her arms around my neck and squeezed, and I held on to her for exactly as long as I was allowed before Derek appeared in the doorway and said my time was up. One Saturday, during one of those visits, I went to the bathroom and passed the small office Derek used as his home workspace. The door was open. On the desk, in plain view, was a bank statement. I didn't go in. I didn't touch it. But I saw the header, and it was a brokerage account, in Derek's name only. The balance visible on the top line was $41,000 and change. I went back to the living room. I finished my visit. I drove home. I called Lorraine. She said that was consistent with what Dennis had flagged. She said she was ready to draft the letter. The letter was 7 pages long. It outlined the $75,000, the renovation costs, the unaccounted balance, the pattern of restricted access, the monthly payments demanded as a condition of seeing Ellie, and my rights under Pennsylvania's grandparent visitation statute, which allows a grandparent to petition for court-ordered visitation when a parent has been deceased for less than 12 months at the time of filing, and Marie had been gone less than a year when the restrictions began. Lorraine had timed the filing window precisely. The letter requested full financial disclosure from Derek, repayment of the $44,000 in unaccounted funds, and immediate restoration of reasonable grandparent access. It was not threatening. It was not emotional. It was the legal equivalent of laying every card on the table, face up, under fluorescent light. Dennis had also prepared a financial summary, clean, dated. Every transfer, every invoice, every gap. It looked like what it was, the kind of document that doesn't leave room for stories. I put both documents in a manila folder. I put the folder in a small cardboard box. The box was about the size of a shoebox. I taped it shut, and I wrote Katie's name on the outside. I called Derek and told him I'd like to come by that Saturday, as usual. He said fine. He sounded like he always sounded polite, in the way that a locked door is polite. I drove to Bethlehem with the box on the passenger seat. I could feel it there, the way you feel something heavy in a room, even if it doesn't weigh much. It was raining lightly. I parked on the street. I walked up the porch steps. Derek opened the door. He looked at the box. What's that? Something for Katie. He started to say something about how gifts needed to be pre-approved, and I said, very quietly, that this wasn't a gift. I said I needed to speak with my daughter. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and something in my face or in my voice must have told him this wasn't a conversation he could redirect, because he stepped aside. Katie was in the kitchen. Ellie was at the table, coloring. When Ellie saw me, she slid off her chair and ran over and grabbed my leg. "Papa Frank, look, I drew a horse, and he's flying." "That's a beautiful horse," I said. Katie looked at the box in my hand. "Dad, what's going on?" I asked if we could sit down. Derek was standing in the doorway now, arms crossed. I set the box on the kitchen table and slid it toward Katie. "Open it when you have a moment alone," I said. "Read everything inside, then call me." Derek stepped forward. "What is this? If this is some kind of—" "Derek," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at him directly. "This is between me and my daughter, and I think when she reads what's inside, it's going to be between you and her too." Katie looked at me. She looked at the box. There was something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, a kind of alert stillness, like an animal that has heard a sound in the woods and doesn't know yet whether to run or stay. "Dad," she said quietly, "you're scaring me." "Don't be scared," I said. "I'm not here to start a fight. I'm here because you need to see something that you should have seen a long time ago, and I should have given it to you sooner." I kissed Ellie on the top of her head. She smelled like crayons and strawberry shampoo. I told her I'd see her soon. She said, "Okay, Papa Frank, but next time can you bring the cake?" And I said I would. I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table. I waited. Katie called me at 11:45 that night. Her voice was very thin, the way it gets when she's been crying for a while and is trying to sound like she hasn't. She said, "Dad, I didn't know about the account." I said I figured she didn't. She said, "He told me the renovation cost more than it did. He told me the rest went to credit card debt." I said, "I know." She was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, "He's been telling me you were difficult, that you were overstepping, that the rules were for Ellie's safety. He said you were unstable after Mom died and that we needed structure." I closed my eyes. I thought about the spreadsheet. I thought about the word unstable. I thought about Marie's voice saying, "Not now, Frank. Let it go." "Katie," I said. I followed every rule, every single one. I've been paying $600 a month to see my own granddaughter for 90 minutes. I have never once raised my voice in your house. I have never once arrived without calling ahead. I am not unstable. I am your father, and I love Ellie more than I know how to say, and I have been sitting on a gray couch trying not to lose the last thing your mother left me." She cried. I let her. I didn't try to fill the silence with words. Sometimes the best thing a parent can do is just stay on the line. She called Lorraine the following Monday, not as an adversary, as someone who needed to understand what was happening in her own household. Lorraine walked her through the financial summary. She walked her through the access restrictions. She explained what parental alienation looks like from the outside, and Katie was very quiet on that call. And then she said, "I thought I was protecting Ellie. He told me I was protecting Ellie. I wasn't in the room for most of what happened after that. I don't know all the conversations Katie and Derek had. I know there was a confrontation. I know Derek denied the brokerage account at first, and then couldn't deny it when Katie showed him the statements. I know he tried to frame it as financial planning, as prudent saving, as something she'd thank him for later. I know she didn't thank him. Katie filed for separation 11 weeks later. The legal proceedings took about 5 months. Derek fought it at first, the way he fought everything with process and paperwork and procedural objections, the same tools he'd used to build a cage around my visits with Ellie. But Lorraine had prepared for that. Every spreadsheet, every email, every canceled visit, every coerced payment, it was all documented, time-stamped, and entered into the record. The financial disclosure confirmed what Dennis had suspected. Derek had moved $43,600 of my gift into a personal brokerage account over a 14-month period. He'd told Katie the renovation had cost more than it did. He'd fabricated a credit card debt to justify the gap. When confronted with the records in mediation, his attorney advised him to settle. The $75,000 was addressed as part of the settlement. The court treated the unaccounted funds as marital waste attributable to Derek. Katie received the townhouse and primary custody of Ellie. Derek got every other weekend and Wednesday evenings, which is exactly the kind of structured, limited access he'd spent 2 years imposing on me. I don't think he appreciated the symmetry. I did. 8 months have passed since then. Katie moved back closer to Allentown. She found an apartment in Emmaus, a small town about 15 minutes from my house. A second-floor walk-up with a big window in the living room that looks out over a row of maple trees. She went back to work, part-time, at a pediatric clinic. Ellie started kindergarten. She still draws horses, but now they all have wings and names, and elaborate backstories that she explains to me in great detail every Saturday morning when I pick her up for breakfast. We go to a diner on Chestnut Street that has vinyl booths and a jukebox that doesn't work, but Ellie pushes the buttons anyway. She orders silver dollar pancakes every time. I order coffee and eggs, and I watch her eat, and I think about Marie. I think about how Marie would be sitting in this booth, taking pictures of Ellie with syrup on her chin, sending them to every person in her contact list. I want to tell you something if you're watching this and something in this story sounds familiar. If someone in your family is being slowly separated from the people who love them, and the separation is being dressed up in reasonable language, rules, structure, boundaries, arrangements, pay attention. Not every boundary is protection. Sometimes a boundary is a wall, and the person building it isn't keeping danger out. They're keeping someone in. Grandparents have rights. That's not a slogan. That's the law. In Pennsylvania, grandparents can petition for visitation when a parent is deceased, when the parents are separated, or when the child has lived with the grandparent for 12 or more months. The specifics vary by state, but the principle is the same in most places. A court can intervene when a grandparent's access to a grandchild is being unreasonably denied. I didn't know that before, Lorraine. I'm telling you now because maybe you don't know it either. And if you've given money to family, document it, not because you don't trust them, because documentation protects everyone. A simple letter, a text confirming the amount and the purpose. An email, something. It takes 5 minutes and it can save you years. Marie used to say trust is the beginning, not the end. She meant that trusting someone doesn't mean you stop paying attention. Last week, Ellie lost her second front tooth. She called me from Katie's phone, talking so fast I could barely understand her, and she said, "Papa Frank, come look, it's a big hole." I drove over. She opened her mouth as wide as it would go and pointed at the gap like she was showing me a canyon. I took a picture. She insisted on posing next to the bathroom mirror so she could see herself in the photo, which meant the picture is of Ellie grinning at her own reflection with her arm around thin air, which is the most perfect picture I've ever taken. I printed 2 copies. One is on my refrigerator. The other is on the kitchen windowsill, next to the last photo of Marie, the one from the 4th of July, the summer before she died, where she's holding a sparkler and laughing at something I said that I can't remember now, no matter how hard I try. I put Ellie's picture right next to it, the 2 of them side by side, the grandmother who ran out of time, and the granddaughter who has all the time in the world. Marie would have been impossible about that tooth. She would have called every person she'd ever met. She would have driven to Emmaus with a gallon of ice cream and a card and probably a small gift that violated at least 3 rules on a spreadsheet that no longer exists. I like to think she knows about the tooth. I like to think that wherever she is, she's already making calls.